Dr. Echo Patel pressed her palm against the reinforced viewport of the research station Harmony's Edge, watching the crimson sun cast long shadows across the desolate landscape of Kepler 442c. The planet's surface stretched endlessly, a tapestry of crystalline formations and metallic sand that shifted with each gust of the perpetual winds. According to every scan, every probe, every scientific instrument they possessed, this world was utterly, completely dead, which made the scratching sounds coming from the station's lower hall absolutely impossible. Day 47 of the Kepler survey. Echo spoke into her recorder, her voice carrying the slight accent that betrayed her Earth Indian heritage. Still no signs of life. Atmospheric composition remains toxic to most known species: 93% nitrogen, 6% sulfur compounds, trace amounts of scratch. Scratch dot Echo single quotes S fingers froze over the controls. The sound was deliberate, rhythmic, almost musical. Computer ran a structural integrity scan on section C through G. Scanning complete. No hull breaches detected. All systems nominal. The scratching stopped. Echo had been the communication specialist for the Terran Xenological Survey for 12 years. She'd established first contact with the crystalline resonance of Vega Prime, learned to speak in mathematical equations with the probability weavers of Tau Ceti, and once spent 3 months translating the chemical poetry of gas giant dwelling aromatics. If something was trying to communicate, she'd damn well figure out what it was saying. She grabbed her environment suit and headed for the airlock. The surface of Kepler 442c was even more hostile than the readings suggested. Echo's suit immediately began compensating for temperature fluctuations that swung 30 degrees in seconds. The gravity was 1.3 times Earth normal, making each step feel like she was wearing lead boots. Through her helmet's heads-up display, she watched atmospheric readings scroll past in alarming reds and yellows. The scratching resumed the moment she stepped outside. It was coming from beneath the station's foundation, where the metal supports met the crystalline rock. Echo knelt carefully, her suit's lights illuminating the junction point. The scratches were fresh, tiny gouges in the metal that formed patterns. Not random patterns, deliberate ones. Geometric shapes, repeated sequences. Almost like, "Holy shit," Echo whispered. "It's trying to talk." As if responding to her voice, the scratching intensified. The patterns became more complex, more urgent. Echo pulled out her tablet and began recording, both audio and visual, as the invisible presence continued its desperate attempt at communication. Then she saw it. Shadow moved independently of any object that should cast it. It flowed along, the ground like liquid darkness, pausing directly beneath her outstretched hand. Echo's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the shadow wave. "Okay," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Okay, I see you. You can see me. That's a start." The shadow rippled, then began moving in deliberate patterns. Circles, lines, simple geometric forms that Echo recognized as universal mathematical concepts. Prime numbers, the Fibonacci sequence. Pi calculated to the 15th decimal place. "You're smart," Echo breathed. "You understand mathematics. But what are you?" The shadow suddenly shot away from her, racing across the crystalline landscape, toward a formation of towering spires about a kilometer distant. It stopped, returned, then repeated the motion. The message was clear. "Follow me." Echo looked back at the research station, then at her suit's power readings. She had 6 hours of life support. It was against every protocol to venture out alone, but her backup team wouldn't arrive for another 8 days. If this was first contact with a previously unknown species, waiting might mean losing the opportunity forever. "Command, this is Dr. Patel. I'm documenting anomalous readings and extending my surface survey. Will report back in 3 hours. She began walking toward the spires, the shadow flowing alongside her like a curious pet. The formations were even more impressive up close, twisted towers of crystal and metal that seemed to grow from the planet's core. They hummed with a low, almost subsonic frequency that Echo felt in her bones. The shadow led her to the base of the central spire, where it began moving in increasingly complex patterns. Echo sat cross-legged on the ground, pulled out her equipment, and began the work she'd trained her entire life for. I'm going to try something, she told the shadow. I'm going to play some sounds, some patterns. You respond however feels natural, okay? She started with simple tones, mathematical relationships expressed as sound waves. The shadow immediately began moving in rhythm, creating visual patterns that corresponded to the audio frequencies. Echo's excitement grew as she realized she was witnessing something unprecedented, a species that existed as living shadow, communicating through a combination of light manipulation and sonic resonance. Hours passed like minutes. Echo gradually built a basic vocabulary with the creature, establishing concepts for self, other, positive, negative, danger, safety. The shadow, she began thinking of it as Whisper, proved remarkably intelligent, quickly grasping abstract concepts and even demonstrating what appeared to be humor when it mimicked Echo's gestures with exaggerated movements. Then Whisper showed her something that changed everything. The shadow suddenly expanded, enveloping Echo in gentle darkness. For a moment, panic seized her, but then the images began. Memories, not her own. She saw Kepler 442c as it had been millennia ago, a lush world of crystal forests and singing mountains, populated by thousands of shadow beings who danced between dimensions of light and darkness. She witnessed their civilization, cities of pure thought, art created from manipulated photons, a society that existed in harmony with the electromagnetic spectrum itself. And then came the dying. A cosmic event, a gamma ray burst from a distant neutron star had stripped away the planet's protective magnetic field and most of its atmosphere. The shadow beings had retreated deeper into their dimensional refuge, watching helplessly as their world transformed into the barren wasteland Echo had found. All except one. Whisper had remained, alone, hoping that someday another intelligence would come, someone who might understand, someone who might help. The visions faded, leaving Echo gasping inside her helmet. Whisper's form had contracted to a small pool of shadow near her feet, seeming somehow diminished, vulnerable. You've been alone all this time, Echo said softly, waiting. God, how long have you been waiting? The shadow pulsed. Long, so very long. Echo checked her suit's chronometer. She'd been out for 5 hours past her scheduled return time. Her comm unit was already receiving concerned messages from the orbital platform. But she couldn't leave. Not now, not when she'd made the most significant xenological discovery in human history. I have to go back, she told Whisper. But I'll return. I promise. We'll find a way to help your people. The shadow rose, forming what Echo had learned was its gesture for negation. Then it began creating new patterns, more complex, more urgent than anything they'd established before. Danger. Others coming. Not like you. Echo frowned. Others? What others? Whisper showed her through a series of rapid images. Military vessels, heavily armed survey teams, mining equipment. The Terran Colonial Authority's Exploitation Division. Echo's blood ran cold. Her research station was just the advanced scout. The main colonial fleet would arrive within the month, ready to strip mine Kepler 442c for its rare crystal formations. They'd never recognize Whisper's species as intelligent. Life, how could they, when they existed as living shadows? To the Colonial Authority, This would just be another dead world ripe for resource extraction, unless she could prove otherwise. Whisper, I need to ask something difficult of you, Echo said. I need you to come with me, back to my station. It's the only way I can document your intelligence. Prove to my people that this world is inhabited. The shadow recoiled, pulsing rapidly in what Echo had learned was extreme distress. Cannot. Outside bonds we fade, die, like others. The others tried to leave their dimensional refuge. When the dying began, tried to escape to stars, could not maintain form, dissolved into nothing. Echo's mind raced. Whisper's species existed in a specific dimensional frequency tied to this planet's unique electromagnetic signature. Leaving would be fatal, unless she could find a way to artificially maintain that frequency. Her suit's power was down to 40 minutes. She had to get back to the station, but every fiber of her being rebelled against leaving Whisper alone again. I'll find a way, she promised. Give me time to think, to prepare. I'll come back tomorrow with equipment that might help. Whisper pulsed acknowledgement, but Echo could sense the creature's resignation. How many times had hope been offered and then withdrawn? How many chances had passed by without rescue? The journey back to the station felt endless. Echo's mind churned with possibilities, most of them requiring resources she didn't have and expertise she'd need to develop overnight. But as she climbed through the airlock and began stripping off her environment suit, one thought kept returning. She was humanity's expert on impossible communication. If anyone could find a solution, it was her. She just had to hope she had enough time. Echo's fingers flew across her workstation's holographic interface, pulling up every piece of research she'd ever read on dimensional physics, electromagnetic field manipulation, and exotic matter containment. Coffee had become her primary food group over the past 18 hours, and her quarters looked like a library had exploded data tablets, crystalline storage units, and scribbled calculations covering every available surface. The colonial fleet's arrival countdown glowed mockingly in the corner of her display. 26 days, 14 hours, 37 minutes. Come on, she muttered, cross-referencing theoretical papers on dimensional anchoring with practical applications of portable field generators. There has to be something ... Her comm unit chimed with an incoming priority message. Echo's stomach dropped as she recognized the sender. Colonial Authority Director Magnus Voss, the man who'd signed off on the Kepler 442c mining operation personally. Dr. Patel, this is Director Voss. I've reviewed your preliminary reports, and I have to say, I'm concerned about the timeline for mineral surveys. The colonial fleet is on a tight schedule, and we can't afford delays based on atmospheric anomalies. Please confirm that your team will have the geological surveys completed before our arrival. Echo stared at the message, her jaw clenched. Atmospheric anomalies. That's how Voss would classify the discovery of an entirely new form of intelligent life. She composed her response carefully. Director Voss, Dr. Patel reporting. I've made significant discoveries that require extended study. Requesting permission to delay mining operations pending completion of xenological protocols. The response came back within an hour. Request denied. The Kepler operation has been in planning for 3 years. Unless you can provide concrete evidence of intelligent life, and I mean irrefutable, legally defensible evidence, mining proceeds as scheduled. Echo leaned back in her chair, running her hands through her black hair. Concrete evidence. How do you provide concrete evidence of a being made of living shadow? How do you prove intelligence to people who'd never bothered to look beyond profit margins? A soft scratching sound interrupted her thoughts. Echo bolted upright, looking around her quarters. The sound was coming from the wall of the outer hall. She pressed her ear against the metal and heard it clearly. Whisper's distinctive rhythmic pattern, the same mathematical sequence they'd established as a greeting. "You followed me," she whispered. The scratching shifted, becoming more complex. Echo grabbed her tablet and began translating. Danger approaches. Felt vibrations in deep places. Others wake. Echo's blood ran cold. Others? You mean more of your people? Not my people. Deep dwellers. Mining vibrations disturb their sleep. When they wake, they hunger. Whisper, what are you talking about? What deep dwellers? The scratching patterns became increasingly urgent, and Echo found herself struggling to keep up with the translation. Images flooded her mind, not the gentle sharing she'd experienced before, but desperate, chaotic flashes of memory dot massive forms moving through the planet's core. Things that had slept since the Great Dying, sustained by the planet's geothermal energy. Predators that had once been kept in check by Whisper's people, held dormant by their collective will. With the shadow beings gone, only the planet's natural stability had kept these creatures sleeping, but seismic mining operations would change that. Jesus, Echo breathed. Vass has no idea what he's about to wake up. She grabbed her environment suit, but Whisper's scratching became frantic. No, too dangerous now. Deep dwellers sense movement above. Hunt anything that disturbs surface. Then, how do I warn them? How do I make anyone believe this? The scratching stopped. For long minutes, Echo heard nothing but the hum of the station's life support systems. Then, slowly, a new pattern emerged. Simple, but somehow filled with tremendous. Resolve. Help you prove. Show truth. Even if means ending. Echo's throat tightened. Whisper no. There has to be another way. Time grows short. Others coming in metal ships. My people's world dies either away from mining or from deep dwellers waking. Only chance is, if your people understand. But you said leaving the planet's electromagnetic field would kill you. Yes, but perhaps. Not immediately. Perhaps long enough. Echo closed her eyes, her mind racing through the implications. If Whisper could somehow survive long enough to reach the station's main laboratory, she might be able to record definitive proof of the shadow being's intelligence. Brain scans, communication protocols, documented interaction with technology. Even the colonial authority couldn't ignore that level of evidence, but it would almost certainly kill Whisper. I won't ask you to sacrifice yourself, Echo said firmly. Let me find another way. The scratching resumed, but gentler now. Already. Sacrificed. Stayed when others left. Waited when hope faded. Watched world die while I lived. This has meaning. This makes the waiting worth something. Echo pressed her palm against the hull, wishing she could somehow touch her friend through the metal barrier. What do you need me to do? Tomorrow, when star rises, bring devices that capture thought, movement, communication. I will come inside, record everything, make them see. And after? The pause was long enough that Echo wondered if Whisper had already begun to fade. Then, after, my people's song ends. But perhaps your people's understanding begins. Echo spent the night preparing. She set up every recording device the station possessed, calibrated sensors to detect electromagnetic anomalies, and prepared communication protocols that would demonstrate Whisper's intelligence beyond any possible doubt. She also sent a carefully worded message to the Colonial Authority, requesting an emergency conference call with Director Voss and the Xenological Review Board. Their response was predictably bureaucratic. They'd grant her 30 minutes to present her findings, but the mining schedule remained unchanged unless she could provide extraordinary evidence of extraordinary claims. 30 minutes to save a world and an entire species. Dawn on Kepler 442c was a haunting sight, the red star painting the crystalline landscape in shades of blood and copper. Echo stood in the station's main laboratory, surrounded by enough recording. equipment to document a small war. Her hands shook slightly as she activated the final sensor array. "Whisper, are you ready?" The response came not as scratching on the hull, but as a gentle dimming of the laboratory lights. Echo watched in awe as shadows began to coalesce in the center of the room, forming patterns that defied physics. The electromagnetic sensors went wild, registering energy readings that shouldn't have been possible. And then Whisper was there, not as a simple shadow on the ground, but as a three-dimensional being of living darkness, constantly shifting and flowing, but unmistakably present, unmistakably alive. "My God," Echo whispered. "You did it. You're actually here." Whisper's form pulsed with what Echo had learned to recognize as acknowledgement mixed with pain. Even in the climate-controlled environment of the laboratory, the shadow being was struggling to maintain coherence. Echo could see the edges of Whisper's form becoming less distinct, more diffuse. "We don't have long," Echo said, beginning the recording sequence. "Let's show them who you really are." For the next 27 minutes, Echo and Whisper performed a demonstration of intelligence that would have impressed any xenologist in the galaxy. Whisper solved complex mathematical problems by manipulating the room's lighting, composed original music by varying the frequencies of electromagnetic fields, and even managed to interface directly with the station's computer systems to create visual art on the main display. Most impressively, Whisper shared memories, not the overwhelming flood Echo had experienced on the surface, but carefully curated glimpses of shadow being civilization, their cities of light and thought, their art and science, their desperate struggle to survive, as their world died around them. This is Dr. Echo Patel, xenological specialist, recording first contact with the indigenous species of Kepler 442c. Echo spoke to the cameras. "As you can see, this being demonstrates clear signs of sapience, cultural development, and peaceful intent. This world is not uninhabited. It is the sacred homeland of an entire civilization." Whisper's form suddenly convulsed, losing cohesion for several seconds before reforming. Echo could see the strain was becoming too much. "There's more," Echo said urgently. "Show them about the deep dwellers." With tremendous effort, Whisper projected images of the creatures sleeping in Kepler 442c's core, massive, predatory things that fed on seismic energy and electromagnetic fields. The mining operations would be like ringing a dinner bell, awakening. Horrors that would consume any living thing on the planet's surface. Director Voss, members of the review board, Echo addressed the recording directly. "This mining operation isn't just genocide, it's suicide. Those creatures will not distinguish between colonial personnel and indigenous life. Everyone dies if we proceed." Whisper's form was becoming increasingly unstable. The shadow being was literally dying before Echo's eyes, sacrificing its existence to save both their species. "Whisper," Echo said softly, "is there anything else? Any message you want to leave?" The dying being gathered its remaining strength and created one final image, not a memory this time, but a hope. Echo saw humans and shadow beings working together, combining technology and dimensional manipulation to restore Kepler 442c's atmosphere. She saw the planet green again, alive again, home to both species. Possible, Whisper pulsed weakly. If you choose ... understanding over ... greed. I choose understanding, Echo said fiercely. I promise you, Whisper, your sacrifice won't be meaningless. The shadow being's form began to dissolve, individual particles of darkness floating away, like smoke. But in those final moments, Echo felt something she hadn't expected. Not sadness, but profound peace. Whisper was finally, after millennia of loneliness, no longer alone. The laboratory lights returned to normal. The electromagnetic sensors registered nothing but background radiation. Whisper was gone, But Echo had her proof. The colonial authorities. Response to Echo's recording was swift and predictable. Categorical denial. Dr. Patel, Director Voss's voice, carried across the subspace communicator with barely concealed irritation. What you've presented is certainly creative. However, holographic manipulation and special effects don't constitute scientific evidence. I'm afraid we'll need something more substantial than shadow puppets to halt a multi-billion credit operation. Echo stood in the station's communications center, surrounded by the Xenological Review board members' holographic projections. Their faces ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Dr. Hendricks, the board's chairman, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Director Voss, Echo said, fighting to keep her voice level. The electromagnetic readings alone should be sufficient to warrant further investigation. The energy patterns I recorded don't match any known technology. Energy patterns that could be artificially generated, interjected Dr. Sarachun, the board's technological specialist. I've reviewed your data, Dr. Patel, and while I admit it's sophisticated, there's nothing here that couldn't be replicated with advanced holographic equipment. What about the computer interface sequences, the mathematical proofs, the cultural, memory projections? Circumstantial at best, Dr. Chun replied. Without a living specimen to examine, we have no way to verify your claims. The irony was bitter as poison. Echo had a living specimen, she'd had one, and it had died to provide the very evidence they were now dismissing. Dr. Patel, Director. Voss's tone carried a note of false sympathy. I understand you've been isolated on that research station for nearly 2 months. Psychological stress, combined with a natural human tendency to anthropomorphize unusual phenomena. It's not uncommon for researchers to experience vivid hallucinations under such conditions. Echo's hands clenched into fists. I am not hallucinating, Director. This planet is inhabited by an intelligent species, and your mining operation will not only commit genocide, but awaken something that will kill every human on the surface. Threats now, Dr. Patel? Voss's voice turned cold. I think you need to step back and consider your career prospects very carefully. The connection terminated, leaving Echo alone with the hum of the station's systems and the weight of absolute failure. She'd promised Whisper that the sacrifice would have meaning, but she'd been naive to think the colonial authority would choose ethics over profit. Echo slumped into her chair, staring at the blank communication screen. In 18 days, the colonial fleet would arrive with enough firepower to turn Kepler 442c into a mining facility. The shadow beings would be forgotten, dismissed as the fantasies of an unstable researcher. And somewhere deep in the planet's core, ancient predators would begin to stir. A soft chime from her personal communicator interrupted her despair. The message header showed an encrypted transmission from Dr. Marcus Webb at the Xenological Institute. On Europa, Echo found Webb was a respected researcher, but they'd never corresponded directly. Dr. Patel, Webb's recorded message began, I've just finished reviewing the classified footage of your contact event. Before you ask how I obtained it, let me assure you that there are people within the colonial authority who aren't entirely motivated by profit margins. Echo sat up straighter, her pulse quickening. What you've documented is remarkable, Webb continued. I've spent 30 years studying xenological phenomena, and I've never seen anything like this. More importantly, I believe you. The electromagnetic signatures are genuine. The behavioral patterns are consistent with sapient intelligence, and the technological interfaces are far beyond any known holographic capabilities. The message paused as Webb leaned closer to his recorder. Dr. Patel, you're not alone in this. There's a network of scientists, military officers, and even some authority officials who believe the colonial authority has become too aggressive in its expansion policies. We've been waiting for a case like this, clear evidence of intelligent life being threatened by corporate interests. Echo felt hope stirring for the first time since Whisper's death. I'm attaching coordinates for a secure meeting point in the asteroid belt near Kepler 442. A ship will be there in 16 days, 2 days, before the colonial fleet arrives. If you're willing to take the risk, we might be able to stop this. The message ended with detailed instructions for encrypting future communications and a warning. The colonial authority was likely monitoring all standard channels. Any further contact would have to be through carefully coded research reports. Echo stared at the coordinates, her mind racing. Taking Webb's offer would mean abandoning her post, violating her contract with the colonial authority, and probably ending her official career. But it might also mean saving an entire species and preventing a disaster that could kill thousands of colonists. She thought of Whisper's final moments, the shadow being's willingness to sacrifice everything for the slim hope of understanding. Between species. Echo to Dr. Webb, she said into her recorder. Message received and understood. I'll be at the rendezvous point. Thank you for giving me hope. The next 15 days passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Echo continued her surface surveys, documenting everything she could about Kepler 442c's unique ecosystem and geological features. She also made daily visits to the crystal spires, where she'd first met Whisper, hoping against hope that another shadow being might emerge from the dimensional refuge. The planet remained stubbornly lifeless. On the 13th day, Echo detected seismic activity deep within the planet's core. The readings were subtle, barely registering on her instruments, but they matched the patterns Whisper had shown her. The deep dwellers were beginning to stir, responding to the approaching colonial fleet's preliminary sensor sweeps. Echo added the seismic data to her growing collection of evidence. If Webb's people were legitimate, they'd need every piece of documentation she could provide. The rendezvous point was a nondescript asteroid designated TK-447, officially catalogued as mineral potential negligible. Echo's shuttle approached it cautiously, her sensors detecting no other ships in the immediate vicinity. For a moment, she wondered if the entire thing had been an elaborate colonial authority trap. Then a section of the asteroid's surface opened, revealing a hidden docking bay. The ship that emerged was unlike anything in the colonial authority fleet, sleek, angular, with hull modifications that suggested significant technological upgrades. As Echo's shuttle was guided into the docking bay, she noticed armed guards in unmarked combat armor and scientific equipment that looked decades ahead of standard. Colonial Authority issued. Dr. Marcus Webb met her at the airlock, a tall, thin man with silver hair and eyes that held the intensity of someone who'd spent a lifetime challenging conventional wisdom. Dr. Patel, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. I know this wasn't an easy decision. Dr. Webb. Echo shook his hand, studying his face. I have to ask, who exactly are you people? Webb smiled grimly. The question you should be asking is who we used to be. Former colonial authority scientists, military officers who've seen too many worlds strip mined, diplomats who've watched first contact turn into first conquest. We call ourselves the Sanctuary Protocol. He led Echo through corridors that hummed with advanced technology. Our mission is simple: preserve indigenous species and prevent ecological disasters caused by aggressive expansion policies. What you've discovered on Kepler 442c is exactly the kind of situation we were formed to address. They entered a conference room where Echo found herself facing a dozen people representing various scientific and military disciplines. The woman at the head of the table had admiral's stars on her collar and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Dr. Patel, the admiral said, I'm Admiral Sarah Kessler, formerly of the Colonial Defense Force. Dr. Webb has shared your documentation with us, and we're prepared to act. The question is, Are you prepared to help us stop a genocide? Echo looked around the table at the faces of people who'd risked their careers to be here. People who'd chosen conscience over comfort, truth over profit. What do you need me to do? Admiral. Kessler activated a holographic display showing the Kepler 442c system. In 36 hours, the colonial fleet will arrive and begin preliminary mining operations. We have a window of approximately 6 hours to present your evidence to the Interstellar Ethics Council before the authority can claim operational jurisdiction. The Ethics Council has the power to override colonial authority decisions. Echo asked. If we can prove intelligent life exists on Kepler 442c, Dr. Webb interjected. The problem is that your footage, while compelling, isn't enough. The authorities, lawyers will claim it's fabricated, and without a living specimen. We need you to go back, Admiral Kessler said. Not to the research station that's being monitored, but to the planet's surface. If there are more shadow beings in that dimensional refuge, we need to find a way to communicate with them. Echo felt her heart sink. Admiral, Whisper told me the others couldn't survive outside their refuge. The dimensional frequency that sustains them is tied to specific locations on the planet, which is why we're not asking them to leave, Dr. Webb said, activating another section of the hologram. We're going to broadcast from the surface. Live, real-time communication with the shadow beings, transmitted directly to the Ethics Council chambers. The plan was audacious and probably impossible. Echo would return to Kepler 442c with a team of Sanctuary Protocol scientists and a portable broadcast array powerful enough to reach the Ethics Council on Earth. They'd have to establish contact with the shadow beings, document their intelligence in real time, and do it all while evading colonial authority surveillance. What about the deep dwellers? Echo asked. If the mining operations wake them up ... Admiral Kessler's expression darkened. That's why we have the military contingent. Dr. Patel, if your shadow being friend was right about those creatures, the colonial fleet is flying into a massacre. We might be their only chance at survival. Echo thought of Whisper's sacrifice, of the promise she'd made to a dying being. The odds of success were minimal, the risks enormous. But the alternative was unthinkable. When do we leave? The modified stealth ship Conscience dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442c system, its hull coated with sensor-absorbing polymers that made it nearly invisible to long-range scanners. Echo stood on the bridge beside Admiral Kessler, watching the tactical display as it populated with contact markers. 12 ships in the colonial fleet, reported the tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss, no relation to the director, she'd assured Echo with a grimace. 3 heavy cruisers, 6 mining platforms, 2 support vessels, and a command carrier. They're maintaining standard formation at the system's edge, waiting for the all-clear from the research station, Admiral Kessler observed. Dr. Patel, how long before they expect your report? Echo checked her chronometer. 18 hours. When I don't respond, they'll assume equipment failure and send a scout ship to investigate, which gives us 16 hours to establish contact with the shadow beings and broadcast our findings to the Ethics Council. The Admiral turned to Dr. Webb. Marcus, is the communication array ready? As ready as we can make it, Webb replied, though his expression was troubled. The quantum entanglement transmitter will give us real-time communication with Earth, but we'll be broadcasting on an open channel. The colonial authority will hear everything. Let them, Echo said grimly. At this point, transparency is our only weapon. The Conscience made its approach to Kepler 442c's night side, using the planet's bulk to mask their insertion. Echo found herself holding her breath as they descended through the toxic atmosphere, remembering her first arrival at the research station just months ago. Then, she'd been excited about the prospect of cataloging a new world. Now she was returning to potentially prevent a war. The landing site was a crystalline plateau approximately 50 kilometers from the spire formations where Echo had first met Whisper. Close enough to reach the Shadow Being's dimensional refuge, far enough to avoid immediate detection by Colonial Authority sensors. As the landing party prepared their equipment, Echo studied the team Admiral Kessler had assembled. Dr. Webb led the scientific contingency enologists, physicists, and communication specialists who'd volunteered for what might be a one-way mission. Commander Torres headed the military escort, 12 Marines in advanced combat armor, who looked like they could fight the Colonial Authority's entire fleet single-handed. And then there was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a Sanctuary Protocols expert on dimensional physics. She was their best hope of establishing stable communication with beings who existed partially in normal spacetime. Dr. Patel, Tanaka said, as they checked the portable broadcast array, I've been studying your recordings of the Shadow Beings. Dimensional interface. The energy patterns suggest they exist in what we'd call a quantum superposition, simultaneously in our dimension and at least 2 others. Can we communicate across dimensional barriers? Theoretically. I've modified our communication array with quantum phase adjusters that should allow limited interaction with beings in adjacent dimensional states. The question is whether your shadow beings will trust us enough to respond. Echo looked out across the alien landscape, watching the red star climb above the horizon. They trusted me once. I just hope I didn't use up all their faith in humanity. The trek to the spire formations took 4 hours through terrain that seemed designed to kill unwary travelers. Crystalline outcroppings created maze-like passages that reflected the team's movements in distorted patterns, making navigation nearly impossible without satellite guidance. The gravity was still punishing, and the atmospheric toxicity forced them to rely entirely on their environment suits. But it was the seismic readings that worried Echo most. Dr. Tanaka's instruments detected increasing activity deep within the planet's core. Tremors that matched the signature whisper had shown her for the deep dwellers' movements. They're definitely stirring, Tanaka reported over the com. Whatever's down there is responding to the seismic vibrations from the Colonial Fleet's sensor sweeps. How long before they wake up completely? Commander Torres asked. Tanaka studied her readings. At current activity levels, 12 to 14 hours. Maybe less if the mining operations begin on schedule. Echo felt a chill that had nothing to do with Kepler 442c's harsh environment. The timeline was collapsing around them. They had to establish contact with the Shadow Beings, document their intelligence, and somehow convince the Ethics Council to halt the colonial operation, all before ancient predators emerged from the planet's depths. The spire formations were exactly as Echo remembered, towering crystalline structures that hummed with subsonic frequencies, creating harmonics that seemed to resonate in her bones. The team set up their equipment at the base of the central spire, with Dr. Webb and his colleagues arranging the broadcast array, while Dr. Tanaka calibrated her dimensional interface systems. Quantum entanglement transmitter is online. Webb reported, we have a clear channel to the Ethics Council chambers on Earth. Dimensional phase adjusters are calibrated, Tanaka added. I'm detecting electromagnetic anomalies consistent with your shadow being's energy signatures, but they're deep within the dimensional refuge. It'll take significant power to reach them. Echo knelt beside the spire, placing her gloved hand against the crystalline surface. The structure was warm despite the planet's frigid atmosphere, and she could feel vibrations running through it, like a heartbeat. This is where I first made contact, she said into her com. The shadow beings use these formations as dimensional anchors. If any of them are still alive, they'll be here. Admiral Kessler's voice crackled through the quantum transmitter. Dr. Patel, we're receiving confirmation from the Ethics Council. They're in emergency session, waiting for your broadcast. You have a direct line to the most powerful judicial body in human space. No pressure at all, Echo thought grimly. She activated her personal recording equipment and began the same communication protocols she'd established with Whisper. Simple mathematical sequences, harmonic frequencies, patterns of light and sound designed to demonstrate intelligence and peaceful intent. For long minutes, nothing happened. The spires continued their subsonic humming, but no shadows moved independently of their casters. Echo felt despair beginning to creep in. What if Whisper had been the last? What if the others had finally given up hope and allowed themselves to fade into dimensional oblivion? Then Dr. Tanaka's instruments began registering massive energy fluctuations. "Something's happening," she reported excitedly. "I'm detecting coordinated electromagnetic activity throughout the entire spire network. It's like ... like they're all talking to each other at once." The air around the central spire began to shimmer, and Echo watched in awe as shadows started coalescing not just on the ground, but in three-dimensional space. Unlike Whisper's desperate solo appearance at the research station, this was a coordinated manifestation by multiple beings. Dozens of shadow forms emerged from the dimensional refuge, each one unique in its patterns of movement and light manipulation. Echo felt tears streaming down her face inside her helmet as she realized what she was witnessing: the surviving remnant of an entire civilization, emerging from hiding to make one final plea for their world's survival. "My God," Dr. Webb whispered. "Over the comm. There are so many of them." The shadow beings began communicating immediately, not with Echo alone, but with all the humans present. They created mathematical proofs in mid-air, using manipulated photons, composed complex musical harmonies by varying electromagnetic frequencies, and demonstrated their mastery of dimensional physics by briefly existing in multiple spatial coordinates. Simultaneously. "Ethics Council, are you receiving this?" Echo spoke into the quantum transmitter. "What you're witnessing is unprecedented, an entire species demonstrating coordinated intelligence and advanced understanding of dimensional physics." The response from Earth came through clearly. "Dr. Patel, this is Chief Justice Harrison. We're receiving your transmission and documenting everything. However, I must inform you that Colonial Authority legal representatives are claiming this is an elaborate hoax using advanced holographic technology." Echo's heart sank, but before she could respond, the shadow beings suddenly changed their behavior. Instead of individual demonstrations, they began moving in perfect unison, creating a massive three-dimensional display that filled the entire space between the spires. The display showed the history of their species in stunning detail there. Rise from primitive shadow dwellers to masters of dimensional science. Their harmonious relationship with Kepler 442c's unique ecosystem, and their desperate struggle to survive as cosmic radiation stripped away their world's protective atmosphere. But then the shadow beings showed something new, something Whisper hadn't been able to communicate. The deep dwellers weren't just predators. They were a symbiotic species that had once worked with the shadow beings to maintain the planet's ecological balance. The cosmic catastrophe had driven them into hibernation, but they would wake as savage, mindless things without the shadow being's dimensional influence to guide them. "Chief Justice," Echo said urgently, "you need to understand, this isn't just about preserving an indigenous species. The mining operations will awaken predators that will kill every human on the planet's surface. The shadow beings are the only thing that can control them." "Dr. Patel," came a new voice through the transmitter, Director Voss himself. "This is an impressive display, but the Colonial Authority maintains that what we're seeing is sophisticated holographic manipulation. Without physical specimens to examine, we cannot legally recognize these phenomena as intelligent life." The shadow beings suddenly stopped their display. For a moment, Echo feared they were retreating back into their dimensional refuge. Then she felt something she'd experienced only once before, the gentle touch of alien consciousness as the shadow beings collectively shared their thoughts. The experience was overwhelming. Echo saw through dozens of different perspectives simultaneously, felt the weight of millennia of loneliness and hope deferred. But most importantly, she understood their decision. One by one, the shadow beings began moving toward the humans. Not aggressively, but with the same resigned determination that Whisper had shown in the research station. They were going to sacrifice themselves to provide the physical evidence Director Voss demanded. "No," Echo shouted, both aloud and through the mental link. "You don't have to do this. We'll find another way." But the shadow being's collective response was firm. "Time ends. Choice now: die meaninglessly or die with purpose. Choose purpose." Dr. Tanaka was frantically adjusting her instruments. "I'm detecting massive dimensional instability. They're forcing themselves fully into our reality." The first shadow being to complete the transition collapsed immediately, its dimensional form unable to maintain coherence outside the refuge. But as it died, it left behind something tangible, a crystalline matrix that pulsed with residual electromagnetic energy. Director Voss's voice came through the transmitter, shaken. What? What just happened?" "Physical evidence," Echo said, coldly. "You wanted proof they're real? There's your proof. Every crystal you see represents a sentient being that just committed suicide to satisfy your legal requirements." More shadow beings were transitioning, each death leaving behind a unique crystalline formation that contained traces of their consciousness, their memories, their final thoughts. The space around the spires was becoming a cemetery of crystallized dreams. "Stop!" Dr. Webb shouted. "We have enough evidence. You don't need to sacrifice yourselves." But the shadow beings continued their final demonstration of intelligence, choosing how and when to die, leaving behind a legacy that no court in human space could dismiss as illusion. Chief Justice Harrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Colonial Authority Director Voss, based on the evidence presented, the Ethics Council hereby issues an emergency stay on all mining operations in the Kepler 442c system pending full xenological review. You don't have jurisdiction over corporate colonial authority operations," Voss snarled. "Actually, we do," Harrison replied calmly. "The Sentient Species Protection Act gives us full authority to halt any operation that threatens recognized intelligent life. What we've witnessed here constitutes legal recognition." Echo felt a moment of triumph, but it was short-lived. Dr. Tanaka's seismic monitors were showing massive activity spikes from the planet's core. "The vibrations from the shadow beings' deaths," Tanaka reported urgently. "They're resonating through the planet's dimensional structure. The deep dwellers are responding." Even as they spoke, the ground began to tremble. Fissures appeared in the crystalline formations, and from deep within the planet came a sound that made everyone's bones ache. A hunting call that hadn't been heard on Kepler 442c from Millennia. Commander Torres grabbed Echo's arm. "We need to evacuate, now." But Echo was looking at the remaining shadow beings, the few dozen who hadn't yet sacrificed themselves. They were forming new patterns, more complex than anything she'd seen before. "They're not done," she realized. "They're trying to tell us something about controlling the deep dwellers." The shadow being's final message was desperate and complex. The deep dwellers could be put back to sleep, but it required a specific harmonic frequency generated by coordinated electromagnetic manipulation. The shadow beings were too few now to generate the necessary resonance, but human technology might be able to replicate the effect. "Dr. Tanaka," Echo called, "can our equipment generate the frequencies they're showing us?" Tanaka studied the shadow being's demonstration while seismic. Alarms shrieked around them. "Maybe, but we'd need to link our systems with the Spire network. used the planet's own crystalline formations as amplifiers. The ground erupted 50 meters away, and something massive and hungry emerged from the depths. The deep dweller was. Everything Whisper had shown echo, and worse, a nightmare fusion of organic and crystalline components. Driven by insatiable hunger and primal rage, Commander Torres and his Marines opened fire, their energy weapons scoring hits that barely slowed the creature down. Whatever you're going to do it fast. Echo ran to the communication array, her hands flying over the controls as she tried to interface their technology with the shadow being's dimensional science. Behind her, she could hear more eruptions as additional deep dwellers emerged from the planet's core. Dr. Patel, Admiral Kessler's voice crackled through the transmitter. The colonial fleet is detecting seismic activity. They're requesting permission to begin emergency evacuation procedures. Tell them to hold position. Echo shouted back. If they land now, those things will slaughter every human on the planet. She established the harmonic link just as a deep dweller charged directly at the spire formation. The creature was the size of a building, its crystalline carapace reflecting their weapons' fire harmlessly. Echo activated the resonance frequency, and the spires began to sing. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The charging deep dweller stopped as if it had run into an invisible wall, its hunting shriek changing to a sound of confusion and pain. Across the battlefield, other deep dwellers began to slow their attacks, their primitive minds overwhelmed by the harmonic frequencies. But the system was unstable. Echo could see power fluctuations in the array, and the remaining shadow beings were visibly struggling to maintain the dimensional link. It's working, she reported, but I don't know how long we can maintain it. That's when the Colonial Authority made their fatal mistake. Director Voss's voice cut through the communication channel. Dr. Patel, I'm ordering you to cease this interference immediately. Colonial Authority ships are moving in to provide assistance, and your electromagnetic emissions are disrupting our navigation systems. Sir, you need to stay back, Echo warned. The harmonic field is the only thing keeping those creatures under control. But Voss had already given the order. 3 Colonial Authority shuttles descended toward the planet's surface, their engines generating massive electromagnetic interference that disrupted Echo's carefully calibrated frequency matrix. The harmonic song faltered, and the deep dwellers immediately resumed their rampage. The first Colonial Authority shuttle never had a chance. It was still descending through Kepler 442C's atmosphere when the disrupted harmonic field released the deep dwellers from their enforced slumber. A creature the size of a starship erupted from a fissure directly beneath the shuttle's flight path, its crystalline appendages shearing through the vessel's hull like it was made of paper. Echo watched in horror as the shuttle's debris rained down across the crystalline landscape, the twisted metal still glowing from atmospheric entry. There had been 12 people aboard that craft, scientists, Marines, support personnel who followed orders and paid the ultimate price for their commander's arrogance. All shuttles abort landing. Admiral Kessler's voice crackled through the quantum transmitter. Return to fleet formation immediately. But it was too late. The electromagnetic interference from the Colonial Authority ships had shattered Echo's harmonic matrix, and deep dwellers were emerging from fissures across the planet's surface. The remaining shadow beings collapsed as they tried desperately to maintain the dimensional linkage without technological support, their forms becoming increasingly diffuse and unstable. Dr. Tanaka, Echo shouted over the chaos. Can we re-establish the harmonic field? Not with 3 ships broadcasting interference. Tanaka replied, her instruments sparking as feedback surged through the communication array. We need them to shut down their electromagnetic emissions completely. Commander Torres and his Marines had formed a defensive perimeter around the spire formation, their advanced weapons scoring hits on the smaller deep dwellers, but barely slowing the larger specimens. The creatures were learning, adapting their attack patterns with each assault. Director Voss. Echo screamed into the transmitter. You have to order your ships to power down. Their emissions are preventing us from controlling these things. Dr. Patel. I am not taking orders from a subordinate researcher who has clearly suffered a complete psychological break. Voss's voice was sharp with authority and panic. Colonial Authority forces will handle this situation using established protocols. Echo watched one of those established protocols play out as the second shuttle attempted to land near their position. The pilot was skilled, managing to avoid the larger deep dwellers and set down behind a crystalline ridge that offered some protection. But as the shuttle's boarding ramp lowered, a pack of smaller creatures, each only the size of a ground car, swarmed the craft. The Colonial Authority. Marines never had a chance to establish a firing position. The deep dwellers moved with terrifying coordination, their crystalline claws shredding through advanced combat armor like it was fabric. Echo heard screams over the comm channels, brief bursts of weapons fire, and then silence. Shuttle 2 is down, reported Lieutenant Commander Voss from the conscience. No survivors detected. The third shuttle's pilot had the sense to abort his landing approach, but the deep dwellers had evolved beyond their original terrestrial limitations. One of the massive specimens launched itself from the planet's surface with shocking agility, its crystalline appendages extending to catch the ascending shuttle. The pilot tried to evade, pushing his engines beyond safe parameters, but the deep dweller's reach was impossibly long. Echo watched in sick fascination as the creature's limbs wrapped around the shuttle's hull, crushing it slowly, while the vessel's occupants screamed over the comb. All Colonial Authority vessels. This is Admiral Kessler aboard the Conscience. King, the transmission from orbit. We are a Sanctuary Protocol ship, and we have tactical intelligence on the situation. Request permission to assist. Admiral Kessler. Director Voss's voice was strained now, his earlier arrogance replaced by growing desperation. This is a Colonial Authority operation. We do not recognize your jurisdiction. Another deep dweller erupted from the ground, one even larger than the first. It moved with purpose toward the communication array, somehow understanding that the human technology was responsible for the harmonic interference that had briefly controlled its kind. Echo realized with growing horror that the creatures weren't just predators. They were intelligent predators. They'd learned to associate human electromagnetic emissions with the harmonic control system, and they were systematically hunting down anything that generated those frequencies. Commander Torres, she called. They're targeting our equipment. We need to. The deep dweller's assault cut off her words. The creature moved with impossible speed for something so massive, its crystalline bulk smashing through the spire formation like a wrecking ball. Torres and his Marines concentrated their fire on the thing's sensory organs, but their weapons might as well have been throwing pebbles. Dr. Webb screamed as a falling crystal shard caught him across the chest, his environment suit rupturing in a spray of atmosphere and blood. Dr. Tanaka tried to reach him, but another tremor sent her sprawling across the jagged ground. Echo found herself face to face with one of the remaining shadow beings, its form so diffuse she could barely make out its outline. The alien's mental voice was weak, fading. Sorry. Failed. Could not maintain. Could not save. You didn't fail, Echo said fiercely. This isn't your fault. My people did this. The shadow being pulsed weakly. Must try. One more time. All of us. Together. Echo understood immediately. The surviving shadow beings were going to attempt one final harmonic resonance, using their remaining life force to generate the frequencies needed to put the deep dwellers back to sleep. It would kill them all, but it might save the humans still trapped on the planet. Wait, Echo said. There might be another way. if we can get the colonial authority ships to shut down their emissions. She grabbed her communicator and opened a channel to the fleet. Director Voss, the shadow beings are willing to sacrifice themselves to save your people, but they need your ships to power down their electromagnetic systems completely. Dr. Patel, I cannot authorize the disabling of critical ship systems based on the advice of an unstable researcher and her imaginary aliens. Echo felt rage building in her chest, rage at Voss's blind arrogance, at the colonial authorities' greed, at her own inability to make them understand. Around her, the surviving members of her team were fighting for their lives against creatures that should never have awakened. But then Admiral Kessler's voice cut through the chaos. Director Voss, this is Admiral Kessler. I am hereby assuming operational command under Emergency Protocol 7. All colonial authority vessels will immediately power down non-essential systems and prepare for emergency evacuation procedures. You have no authority here, Voss snarled. Actually, I do, Kessler replied calmly. Emergency Protocol 7 grants senior military officers command authority when civilian leadership proves demonstrably incompetent. I'm invoking that authority now. Echo felt a surge of hope as the electromagnetic interference began to fade. The shadow beings immediately started moving toward the communication array, their forms becoming more solid as they prepared for their final sacrifice. Dr. Tanaka, Echo called. Can you re-establish the harmonic matrix? I can try, Tanaka replied, blood streaming from a head wound. But the equipment took damage. I don't know if it'll hold. Echo worked frantically to repair the connections while the shadow beings positioned themselves around the Spire network. She could feel their collective determination, their willingness to give everything for the chance to save both species from the horror they'd inadvertently unleashed. The harmonic field came online just as the largest deep dweller reached their position. The creature's hunting shriek changed to a wail of confusion as the resonance frequencies overwhelmed its primitive nervous system. Across the battlefield, other deep dwellers began to slow their attacks, their rage-fueled consciousness suppressed by the harmonic matrix, but Echo could see the cost. The shadow beings were burning through their remaining life force at an unsustainable rate. They might be able to maintain the field long enough for the humans to evacuate, but they would all die in the process. There has to be another way, she whispered. That's when Dr. Tanaka made a discovery that changed everything. Echo, she called out, her voice excited despite their desperate situation. Look at these readings. The crystalline formations aren't just amplifying the harmonic frequencies, they're storing them. Echo looked at her instruments and understood immediately. The spires were acting like massive capacitors, building up harmonic energy with each pulse of the shadow being's collective resonance. If they could find a way to release that stored energy in a controlled burst. Can we program a delayed release? Echo asked. Maybe, Tanaka replied, but I'd need to interface directly with the Spire network, and the feedback could kill me. Echo made the decision without hesitation. Do it. As Tanaka began the dangerous interface procedure, Echo opened a comm channel to Admiral Kessler. Admiral, we're going to attempt to put the deep dwellers into permanent hibernation, but we need all human vessels to evacuate the system immediately. The energy release will be massive. Understood, Dr. Patel. Fleet is already moving to safe distance. What about your team? Echo looked around at the survivors, Commander Torres, and 3 of his Marines, Dr. Tanaka working desperately at the interface, and herself. The shadow beings were fading fast, their forms becoming increasingly transparent as they poured their life force into the harmonic matrix. We stay, Echo said simply. Someone has to make sure this works. The final phase of the operation was both terrifying and beautiful. Dr. Tanaka successfully interfaced with the Spire network, programming a harmonic pulse that would resonate through the planet's entire crystalline structure. The shadow beings, understanding what was happening, gave the last of their strength to charge the system dot as they died, each shadow being left behind, not just a crystalline matrix, but a fragment of their consciousness embedded in the Spire network. They became part of Kepler 442c itself, their intelligence and wisdom preserved in the planet's dimensional structure. The harmonic pulse, when it came, was like nothing Echo had ever experienced. It rang through the planet's crust like a bell, its frequencies perfectly tuned to the deep dwellers' neural patterns. The creatures stopped their rampage immediately, their rage-clouded minds cleared by the overwhelming resonance. But instead of simply falling back into hibernation, something unprecedented happened. The deep dwellers began to remember. Echo watched in amazement as the creatures' crystalline carapaces began to change, their chaotic surface patterns reorganizing into more complex designs. The shadow being's final gift had been more than just a sleeping song. It had been a restoration of the symbiotic relationship that had once existed between the two species. The deep dwellers weren't monsters. They were Kepler 442c's immune system, designed to protect the planet from threats, but driven insane by millennia of isolation from their shadow being partners. The harmonic pulse had restored that connection. Even in Death Dot, as Echo watched, the largest deep dweller approached the Spire formation where she stood. Instead of attacking, it carefully examined the crystalline matrices that contained the shadow beings, preserved consciousness. Then it did something that brought tears to Echo's eyes. It began to sing. The creature's voice was nothing like human vocalization, but the harmonics were unmistakable. It was mourning its lost partners while celebrating their reunion. Other deep dwellers across the battlefield took up the song, their combined voices creating a planetary requiem that would echo through Kepler 442c's crystalline formations for ages to come. 6 months after the Kepler 442c incident, Dr. Echo Patel stood before the Interstellar Ethics Council in Geneva, delivering her final report on what the media had dubbed the Shadow War. The council chambers were packed with representatives from dozens of worlds, all trying to understand how a routine mining operation had nearly triggered an interstellar diplomatic crisis. The shadow beings of Kepler 442c were not just an intelligent species, Echo told the assembled delegates. They were the keystone consciousness that maintained the planet's entire ecosystem. Their sacrifice prevented a disaster that would have killed thousands of colonial personnel, but it also taught us something profound about the nature of intelligence itself. Chief Justice Harrison leaned forward. Dr. Patel, you've recommended that Kepler 442c be designated as a protected world under the Sentient Species Act, despite the fact that the indigenous population is, by your own account, extinct. Can you explain this recommendation? Echo activated the holographic display, showing recent footage from the planet's surface. The crystalline spires still hummed with harmonic frequencies, but now they were accompanied by the deep dwellers' songs complex, musical compositions that varied with the planet's weather patterns, solar radiation levels, and even the orbital mechanics of its moons. The shadow beings didn't simply die, Echo explained. They integrated their consciousness with the planet's dimensional structure. Kepler 442c itself has become a form of distributed intelligence, with the deep dwellers serving as its sensory organs and the crystalline formations acting as its neural network. The implications were staggering. An entire world that thought, felt, and composed music. The first truly planetary intelligence humanity had ever encountered. Furthermore, Echo continued, the deep dwellers have begun constructing new crystalline formations that seem designed to communicate with orbital vessels. They're actively trying to establish contact with us. Director Voss, who had somehow managed to avoid court-martial despite his catastrophic decisions during the crisis, stood up from the Colonial Authority delegation. Dr. Patel, while your creative interpretations of these phenomena are certainly imaginative, the fact remains that Kepler 442c contains some of the richest crystal deposits in known space. The Colonial Authority maintains that these resources are essential for continued human expansion. Echo fixed him with a stare that could have melted steel. Director Voss, those crystals you want to mine are the preserved consciousness of an entire civilization. You're literally talking about strip mining the equivalent of a planetary library. The debate that followed was heated and complex, touching on questions of artificial intelligence, environmental protection, and the rights of non-traditional forms of consciousness. But in the end, the Ethics Council's decision was unanimous. Kepler 442c would be protected as the first recognized planetary intelligence, with a permanent research station established to study and communicate with a new hybrid consciousness. Echo accepted the position as the station's director, returning to the world where she'd learned that intelligence could take forms beyond human imagination. The Kepler 442c Research Institute became a pilgrimage site for xenologists, philosophers, and artists from across human space, all drawn by the opportunity to communicate with a living world. The deep dwellers proved to be fascinating conversationalists. Once proper communication protocols were established, they possessed genetic memories stretching back millions of years, and their partnership with the shadow beings' preserved consciousness gave them insights into dimensional physics that revolutionized human understanding of the universe. Importantly, they were artists. The deep dwellers composed symphonies using seismic vibrations, created sculptures by guiding the growth of crystal formations, and painted with light itself by manipulating the planet's electromagnetic field. Their art was alien, but undeniably beautiful, expressing concepts and emotions that human language couldn't adequately describe. Echo often spent her evenings at the observation deck of the research station, listening to the planet's music as the deep dwellers sang their daily prayers to their departed shadow being partners. The songs were different each night, reflecting the planet's mood and the subtle changes in its electromagnetic environment. On this particular evening, as Kepler 442c's red sun set behind the crystal spires, Echo detected a new harmony in the planetary song. The deep dwellers were incorporating electromagnetic patterns that matched the research station's communication frequencies. They were literally singing about the humans who now shared their world. Dr. Patel, came a voice from behind her. Echo turned to see Dr. Marcus Webb, who had recovered from his injuries and accepted a position at the Institute. We're receiving a transmission from Earth. The Ethics Council has approved funding for the PUM Sanctuary Protocol to establish permanent research stations on 12 more worlds where Colonial Authority operations have been suspended pending xenological review. Echo smiled, thinking of Whisper and the other shadow beings who had sacrificed everything to prove that intelligence deserved respect regardless of its form. Their deaths had sparked a revolution in human thinking about consciousness, rights, and the responsibilities that came with expanding into the galaxy. Any word on the Colonial Authority's response? Webb's expression darkened slightly. Director Voss has been reassigned to a desk job on Luna. The Authority is officially cooperating with all Ethics Council directives, but there are rumors about unofficial mining operations in unmonitored systems. Echo nodded grimly. The battle for Kepler 442c had been won, but the war between profit and principle would continue across the galaxy. Humanity was still learning to balance its expansion with its conscience. But tonight, as she listened to a planetary intelligence sing lullabies to the stars, Echo allowed herself to feel hope. The universe was vast and full of wonders that human science was only beginning to understand. Each new form of consciousness they encountered, each intelligence they learned to communicate with, expanded the definition of what it meant to be alive. The Deep Dweller's song reached a crescendo, their harmonies perfectly synchronized with the electromagnetic patterns of the aurora that danced across Kepler 442c's sky. And for just a moment, Echo could swear she heard other voices in the music whispers of consciousness that existed between dimensions, in the spaces where light became shadow and thought became reality. Whisper, and the other shadow beings weren't truly gone. They lived on in the planet's song, in the Deep Dweller's memories, and in the crystalline matrices that preserved their dreams of understanding between species. Echo raised her hand to the observation deck's window, pressing her palm against the transparent aluminum as she had once pressed it against her helmet on the planet's surface. And somewhere in the music of the spheres, in the harmony between organic and artificial intelligence, between human curiosity and alien wisdom, she felt an answering touch. The galaxy was full of voices, waiting to be heard. And Echo Patel, humanity's translator of impossible languages, would spend the rest of her life learning to listen. As the red sun disappeared behind the crystal spires and Kepler 442c's 3 moons rose into the star-filled sky, the planetary intelligence sang its eternal song of loss, love, and hope. It was a melody that would echo through the cosmos for millennia to come, a reminder that consciousness was the most precious resource in the universe, and that understanding was always worth the price of admission. The whisper of shadows had become a symphony of light, and the galaxy would never be the same. 5 years later, the Kepler 442c Research Institute had become the most important xenological facility in human space. Echo Patel, now director of interspecies communication, stood in the Institute's main laboratory, watching her team work with technologies that would have been pure science fiction just a decade earlier. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's dimensional interface systems allowed direct communication with the shadow being's preserved consciousness, while Dr. Sarah Chun, who had left the Colonial Authority after the Kepler incident, had developed harmonic translation matrices that converted the Deep Dweller's seismic songs into Holmes' human comprehensible language. But the most remarkable development had been the emergence of hybrid consciousness Deep Dwellers, who had learned to manipulate light and shadow like their extinct partners, creating the first new shadow beings in millennia. These hybrid entities possessed the physical resilience of the Deep Dwellers combined with the dimensional manipulation abilities of the original shadow beings. Dr. Patel called Dr. Chun from her workstation. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Sanctuary Protocol. Admiral Kessler wants to speak with you directly." Echo accepted the call, and Admiral Kessler's holographic image materialized. In the laboratory, the Admiral looked older, her hair now completely silver, but her eyes still held the same determination that had saved Echo's team 5 years earlier. "Echo," Kessler said without preamble, "we've got a situation. The Colonial Authority has discovered something in the Proxima Centauri system ruins of an ancient civilization. On Proxima B, they're claiming salvage rights, but our advanced scouts have detected electromagnetic signatures that match the shadow being's dimensional frequencies." Echo felt her pulse quicken. "You think there might be survivors?" "Unknown. But Director Voss has been reassigned to head the Proxima operation, and he's pushing for immediate excavation rights. The Ethics Council is stalling, but we need someone with your expertise to make first contact if there's anyone still alive down there." Echo looked around the laboratory at the work they'd accomplished on Kepler 442c. The C Research Institute had become a beacon of hope for xenological studies, proof that humans could learn to coexist with intelligence in all its forms. But if the Colonial Authority was about to repeat their mistakes on another world... when do we leave? She asked. Admiral Kessler smiled. "The Conscience is already en route to pick you up." "And Echo?" "This time, we're going in with full ethics, Council authorization, and a task force that includes some very concerned Deep Dwellers who want to help search for their shadow being cousins. Echo turned to look out the laboratory's window at the crystal spires where the hybrid shadow beings were conducting their daily meditation rituals. The new generation was stronger than their predecessors, capable of existing in normal spacetime for extended periods. They'd volunteered to join the Proxima expedition, eager to help their ancient allies if any still survived. Dr. Chun, Dr. Tanaka. Echo called to her team. Pack everything. We're going to make history again. As the conscience lifted off from Kepler 442c's surface, Echo watched the planet shrink below them, its crystalline formations still singing their eternal songs of loss and hope. The deep dwellers had gathered at the spires to bid farewell to their human friends, their combined voices creating a harmonic that would follow the ship all the way to the edge of the system. The galaxy was vast, filled with wonders and mysteries that humanity was only beginning to understand. But with each world they visited, each intelligence they encountered, the definition of consciousness expanded a little further. And somewhere in the space between stars, in the dimensions where light became shadow and thought became reality, ancient voices whispered of reunion, understanding, and the endless possibility of connection across the cosmic dark. The echo of understanding would continue to spread, one world at a time.